Come, come, come out tonight. Come, come, come out to play. Come, come, come out tonight. Alice, come out and play.
Alice had just turned 26, and the restaurant staff where she worked, the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant located on Hobohemia's Washington Street, the tiny town's main drag, threw a small surprise birthday party for her that night after closing. 26, yet somehow stuck waiting tables, deep in debt, tired as hell, still single, all alone, and now pregnant. This isn't where she saw herself 8 years ago when she left high school. It wasn't the plan she or her parents had envisioned for her adulthood at all. Well, so much for plans, she figured. People planned, and God laughed up her sleeve from afar at the pathetic planners as she watched their pitiable plans crumble and fail. Alice's parents had instilled a strong sense of that good old-fashioned Protestant work ethic, embedded snugly within her psyche for as long as the girl could remember. At 14, they encouraged her to get a part-time job after school so she'd have her own pocket money. People told her, work hard, save some of what she earned, and everything would turn out just fine. Only it wasn't fine. After over a year of the COVID-19 lockdown, a year where it was no longer possible for a person to eke out their living by working gigs in the then universally shuttered food and beverage industry that provided employment for anyone willing to toil harder than most for minimum wage plus tips, her credit card debt had mounted as the months dragged by. Now the total amount of interest charged each statement period on her accrued bills nearly exceeded the required minimum payment requested. She fell deeper down the rabbit hole, a place easily to fall into once a person had gotten snared in those 19 to 26% APR interest fees. The principals and fees seemingly compounded uncontrollably every month on each of Alice's Visa, Master, American Express and Discover credit cards. The Mad Hatter's late-night tea party, which had included a single round of drinks, compliments of the night manager, and a birthday cake with a solitary solemn candle that, as obliged by tradition, she blew out minutes before the event had broken up. Perhaps because it was her birthday, her night manager, who usually could be a bit of a testy jabberwock, had not only treated everyone to a free drink, he'd also surprised her with a birthday present, an extra work shift tomorrow. So instead of staying to party with her colleagues, Alice unplugged the Segway ES2 electric scooter she kept in the back charging up while working to make the tedious trip from Hobohemia to the studio apartment she could barely afford in Brooklyn. And because the Jabberwocky's gift of an added shift entailed coming in to open the eatery tomorrow morning in order to work a double throughout the day and into the end of the night. During daylight hours, the magic of light, in addition to various experiments with hair dyes and tints, could make the long hair she kept tied behind her while working appear as a fiery shade of deep Titan red. Then at other times, especially during dusk, it seemed to be somewhat flaxen and more strawberry blonde. This was not unlike her eyes, which looked to be either green or hazel colour, depending upon the time of day. The hair was her crowning glory, no pun intended. In fact, when not at the restaurant, Alice got gigs as a dancer in various music videos and worked using a stage name, Gingy. She loved listening and dancing to Afro-fusion music, styles ranging from Coupé de Carlet to Undobolo to Guara Guara, and was the go-to girl when many of the New York City production companies required dancers who possessed that rare look and unique talent. After collecting it tightly beneath the helmet of the protective headgear she normally adorned for these scooter rides, Alice picked up her share of the day's pool tips prior to setting off into the warm, early summer darkness. Before leaving the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant, which sometimes felt like her own personal purgatory, she stole one last glance at the bright white face of the Gothic-style clock hanging on the wall behind the bar, making a casual mental note that it was 3:15 a.m. Oddly, as she turned away from the timepiece, Alice could have almost sworn that the hands of the tired ticker had begun to move precariously backward. Now that couldn't have been explained by the one drink she'd had. Due to her newly confirmed and unplanned pregnancy, she'd only imbibed a single cup of cranberry juice sans any addition of alcohol instead of her usual glass of Dos Minas Malbec red wine. Well, maybe it was. Oh well, never mind. The ride home on Thevena Plesacica, her name for the scooter, which in English meant the Red Dancer, always began down Washington Street, and was at first unproblematic. As it was Alice's wont, as well as the fact that the two-wheeler's maximum velocity was limited to about 16 miles per hour, even with a strong tailwind, she drove cautiously below the legal speed limit through the sparse nighttime vehicular traffic. That was until the front wheel of the Segway ES2 sank down deep into one of the many potholes that plagued pedestrians and drivers alike on Hobohemian streets and sidewalks. Frightfully, this caused her to swerve slightly toward the direction of a van parked roadside. And yet again, another odd optical illusion had occurred that evening. Alice saw the scooter's lone headlight, as well as the image of herself upon it, being reflected back before she crashed straight into the parked carrier. For you see, attached along its sides were unframed sheets of glass and mirrors. Then, after the accident, when Alice finally regains consciousness, she was in the bar standing before the aforementioned Gothic clock that read 1 minute past 9 in the morning. This time the timepiece's hands are definitely ticky-tocky, headed backward, all counterclockwise and in the wrong direction. Just speak in Croatian when you can't think of the English words for a thing. Turn around a time or two, then walk away and remember who you are, Alice, said Nida, as she hopped down off the top of the bar. She'd been festooning the interior of the Mad Hatter bar and restaurant with flowers she'd fashioned out of papier-mâché, because if anyone would ever care to ask, she'd tell them that the mad owners of the Hatter do not care about such matters. Somehow, and what not, Nida appeared definitely different from what Alice could remember. No, it couldn't be. Could it? Nida, dear, did you do something different with your hair? Alice asked. Yet no, it wasn't just her friend's hair, but everything about her was, well, somewhat off. There now were 2 tiny pointed ears atop her head. They were barely visible, but Alice was sure they were ears nonetheless. Nida's face was covered with the sheen of fine hairs, so much so it resembled fur. What was more out of place were the long whiskers she now sported from the lower side of her cheeks, which well extended above and past each adjacent shoulder. Then most peculiar of all was that, "O Holy Mother who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." Shall she dare even think it? As Alice's eyes travelled the short distance between her friend's shoulders, down past her arms, her hands now looked like paws, and instead of fingernails, they were tipped with small, sharp claws. Nida? It's been wizard's years since I've heard that name. Everyone here, of course, currently calls me Dinah, so you may call me Dinah now as well, dear. As she expressed her preference in the appellation, Nida/Dinah lifted her right paw to her lips, giving the white and black fur on the back of it a few licks with the flat, long, broad tongue that flicked out from her pink lips. Satisfied that the paw was then sufficiently suited for the job she had in mind, she used it to thoroughly groom the back of each of the ears that now crowned her cranium. First she brushed the right ear, and then reaching around toiled with the left one until sure the task had been satisfactorily accomplished. Oh, my moons and stars, thought Alice. Should she even think it, much less say? And if she were to say it, then how should it be kindly said? Well, might as well just get it out there then. The girl, who's her very, very, very good friend, presently looked just like a cat. Now, it wasn't so out of sorts for Alice's gal pal to play a joke on someone, although it was rarely on Alice. During the time they worked in the restaurant together, which often would seem an eternity, customers had often remarked how similar the two looked, and on occasion even questioned if they were sisters. So the girls being girls, colluded on a prank when asked by replying they were not only sisters but indeed twins. They'd even concocted a tale where they'd been born to Russian parents who were on the run from some bad guys back in the old country. Thus their parents had forbidden them to speak Russian in public lest they'd blow the family's cover. Most of those who inquired about their biological connection ate this up like a fat person tasting their first French fry. As a matter of fact, many of the inquisitive customers had nicknamed them the Russian dolls. You know, the kind where you open up one to find another smaller one inside, then a smaller one inside of that one, that had a smaller one inside that, had a smaller one inside, and so on and so forth. A halfpenny and sixpence here and there, as they heard some from across the pond would remark. Trying to avoid it, yet ultimately yielding to temptation, Alice broached the subject to ask, Dinah, are you, well, I don't know how to say it, so I'll just blurt it out. Are you a cat? A cat? A cat? A feline? A moggy? A puss? A kitty? A mouser? A tabby? A grimalkin? A pussy? A malkin? A cat? Alice, dear girl, what exactly are you trying to say? I'm actually no longer quite sure now, my dear Dinah. I'm presently at such a loss for words, I guess, is where I'm at on this touchy subject. Then simply do as I instructed earlier of trying to say it in Croatian instead of English. We'll see if that's the remedy for this illness. Alice then uttered, Dali si zaista mačka, prior to turning round a time or two, then walking away and remembering who she was. Oh, I understand you now. You're asking if I'm a... It was exactly then that one of the papier-mâché flowers rudely interrupted their conversation. Of course she's a blithering cat, you boob. We may not have eyes, but even all of us hanging here can see that. Me too. Yeah, me too. Me too. And me too. The Me Too's continued as the chorus went on until each and every flustered flower had eventually chimed in on that touchy feline subject. Who said that? Alice boldly asked as she spun around on her toes to see and hear who was saying what. Speak up now. Who? I said that. Someone after a few seconds had responded. May I ask your name then, in order that I may address you properly? Well, obviously it's Rose, my child, replied the blood-red papier-mâché flower. Well, Rose, that was a tad impolite of you to interrupt others in the midst of a very serious discussion, and then to add insult to the injury, as if to pour salt on the wound, you called me a boob. Oh, Rose said with a sigh, I have been told on occasion I may be a mite thorny at times. I apologise. Then apology accepted, if for no other reason than many believe to hold a grudge for too long may be bad for one's health. I then apologise too, said another, then another, and another, until every papier-mâché flower in the place said they were sorry. All right, now that we've put a rest to that, may I ask your names? Asked Alice. In accordance, each and every freaky faux flower identifies itself. There was Daisy, one named Tiger Lily, Sweet Pea, another called herself Violet, Azalea, the ever-so-shy Begonia, the overly curious Chrysanthemum, even a Dahlia, and too many others to remember, if not written down. And Alice was way too busy listening to write anything down, even if she'd possessed a pencil and paper. And Dinah would be of no help, seeing she had pussy paws as opposed to human hands. So what was Alice left to do but listen? She remembered she was once told, talk less, listen more, which in and of it wasn't much of a plan, but when it's the only plan available, one must make do with what one has. By this time, Dinah had climbed atop one of the bar stools within the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant. She sat upon it much as a cat would. Her lean, long legs were pulled up before her, with pawed arms clasped around them, resting her furred chin on her kneecaps, while Alice and the fluent Flowers spoke more. Finding this of little interest, she slowly lowered the lids of her eyes to enjoy a quick morning catnap, sank into a dream about having a hit or two of catnip, chasing some mice about the restaurant's kitchen, and contentedly purred herself to sleep. But the mice in this dream did not play by the rules. Each time she would corner one in the kitchen, it would turn into an insect. Now, not your average insect, mind you, but very, very, very large insects. So large, larger than a cat, even larger than the many lions of the African jungles who were her distant cousins. Ergo, much, much, much larger than herself. So much so that they not only gave her a start and a fright, but when cornered would turn about to chase the cagey cat. Oh, the irony of the hunter being now the hunted. The irony indeed. The last thing any cat would want to be called was a fraidy cat. Awaking with a sudden startled shudder of her lively molly body, Dinah checked the clock above the bar for the time. Since the turned-around ticker had been ticky-tocking backward, it was now around 6:21 a.m, so she still had some time to catch more Z's. 3 hours, 21 minutes and 1 second to be exact, to nod off again, especially since Alice and those talkative Flowers had finally ceased their babbling. So she decided to close her pussycat eyes for another doze until 3 a.m, which was closing time for the MHBNR, and since time was now moving backward, at precisely 1 second past 2:59 and 59 seconds in the nocturnal morning, the place would be open again, so that she and Alice and the other servers would be working another shift. This time, when Dinah dozed, as the Flowers had done with Alice, the interestingly big insect spoke to her and offered her an apology. "We're sorry, love. Didn't mean to give you such a start. It's just that we can never trust when we'll be changed in size, now can we, hon?" said one of the beetles, about the size of a large buffalo. Then an enormous ephemerid chipped in. "Yeah, our bad, babe." Well, what do you know? The insects actually appeared to be nice. But cats being cats, Dinah was still unsure if they were worthy of her trust. A mantis that had been preying on the floor low added, "We actually all could have handled that better, lass. We really could have, should have, and would have if we only had a clue before these changes occur. But we just don't, so there you have it, and there it is, I guess." The sensuously slumbering puss noticed the mantis was holding a Bible. She believed it to be the New King James Version, but cats probably know as much about Bibles as fish know about bicycles. So she ventured to ask, "Would you all swear to that on the Bible he's holding?" "We will," they agreed in unison, as each placed a hand or foot or whatever, it's rather difficult to tell which is which with bugs, and spoke the following words as one, like they were some sort of Greek chorus. "We shouldn't have did what we did when we did do what we did to you. We're sorry, kitty cat." Taking this act of attrition perhaps too much at face value, but sincerely taking it to heart, the kindly kitten recalled what Alice had told the talkative funny Flowers of how someone holding a grudge for too long may be bad for one's health. So, simply seconds prior to waking again, the unbegrudging Grimalkin forgave one and all, and then awoke. Groggily, Dinah lustily stretched out her body, in the feline-ish fashion cats are accustomed to when they awake, to get ready for work, another night shift at the Hatter. Oh, 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 what a wickedly wild shift it would be, and here I swear we shift you not. The Jabberwocky, also known as the night manager at the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant, was in his office that night interviewing a pair of rather heavy-set ladies for positions at the food and beverage establishment. One of the prospects was named Dee, and the other called herself Dom, which of course were abbreviated first names for Desiree and Dominique, but the interview was going far from well. When he inquired by asking, "Are you experienced?" as to their qualification and prior to the inclusion of the position to be filled, the opening bars of Jimi Hendrix and the Experience's Purple Haze blasted from nowhere to blare out his voice. On the second attempt, asking, "Are you experienced?" he was drowned out by the band's Manic Depression. Next came Hey Joe, followed by Love or Confusion, May This Be Love, I Don't Live Today, The Wind Cries Mary, Fire, Third Stone from the Sun, Foxy Lady, and wrapping it up was a rousing rendition of Are You Experienced? Now, if there was one thing that Alice unquestionably was sure of, it was her Hendrix, and that this must be the American version of the classic hard rock album, because she knew the one she was familiar with listening to while growing up in Croatia, the UK version, would have contained the following: Side 1 sequence, Foxy Lady, Manic Depression, Red House, Can You See Me, Love or Confusion, I Don't Live Today, followed by Side 2s, May This Be Love, Fire, Third Stone from the Sun, Remember, and Are You Experienced? After hearing the American version upon arriving in her newly adopted USA homeland, she thought of what a travesty that the European one had neglected to include neither Purple Haze nor Hey Joe, or even The Wind Cries Mary. What a travesty indeed! In the woman's humble opinion, those were the three best tracks from any of Hendrix's earlier ethereal and epic song catalogues, although they at least did maintain Foxy Lady in their messed up, myopic and misguided Euro mix. Time after time, the Jabberwocky would repeat his question to Dee and Dom, only to be drowned out by the power trio's blistering brand of rock and roll. Dee, are you experienced with, or Dom, are you experienced in? But before he could fully get out what he was attempting to ask, Jimmy's gut-punching guitar riffed over him. Cut short by Hendrix's shrieking lyrics. Or Manic Depression is Searching My Soul, or the lyrics from any of the other 9 songs on the American mix. Oh, Shranye. Sto se dovraga dodjaga, Alice thought to herself in her native tongue, which of course when translated to English would be, oh shit, what the hell is happening? As she and Dinah listened to the exchange from outside his office door, the two of them stood so still you would probably forget that they were still alive. Neznam, Možda si zabavlaju ili nešto, Dinah replied, and which if you go ask Alice she'd explain that was Croatian for, I don't know, perhaps they're rocking out or something. Dinah, when did you learn to speak my language? We've always spoken the same language, sis. It's just sometimes we do it in different tongues. Oh, all right then. I guess that makes a lot of sense in some kind of curiously convoluted way. It's just that recently my head so hurts because not much is really making sense at all. As she spoke those last words, Alice rubbed her forehead, and much to her surprise, a bump had now risen where she touched, even though she couldn't remember hitting her head on anything. This had now become as bizarre and strange as those Marvel comics she'd read in secret as a child in Croatia. Comic books that had first led her to learn how to read and speak the English language. By this time the Jabberwocky had now thrown in the towel of defeat on his questions, taking advantage of his sudden silence. First Dee, and then followed by Dom, each recited a poem. Dee's was rather short. Serious nifawasuishjamo, aden nog met zeden nog. Snaripsgravexawisje, onze stam iasi opsach. Old parboy op door wesnip. Adim liusnet, sedim liusnif. Old opsnel liusnif stierg. Adim liusnet, sedim lius. Feverishly, Alice tried to transcribe what she thought she was hearing, but neither by listening to or reading them could the woman make out any of the words. It was all just gibberish. So, turning to Dinah for advice, Alice asked, was she speaking Pig Latin? Or could it be Esperanto? Or ancient Aramaic or something? Does any of this make a lick of sense to you, dear sister? Meow. I mean, not really. Meow. But then you could ask the looking-glass. Meow, my sister. She had never been aware of the mirror that hung from the wall next to the Jabberwocky's door. Figuring there was nothing to lose, she held up the meandering and meaningless scrawled text so it could be reflected in the glass, then queried boisterously, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, do you understand this hot mess at all?" But the mirror only stared back at Alice in stone-cold silence. Looking intently into its reflection, then seeing the words, letters and lines in reverse of what she had hurriedly scribbled down, their meaning now gently emerged like an early rising of every morning sun. Tweedle me this, then tweedle me that. Agree to tweedle and twaddle. For tweedle me this, then tweedle me that. Been so bored by all your prattle. Just what you say, it matters not, as you ask of our experience. Ponder this, then ponder that. What makes you so effing serious? While on the other hand, or poor if you were Dinah, Dom's poem was rather tediously long. It went on, stanza after stupid stanza, rattling and ranting about some wacky walrus walking with some capricious carpenter and their penchant for procuring oysters to eat. Much too long if one were to retell the telling of it here. So shall we all just agree for the sake of brevity to move on, to move this trippy tale along to the next detail? Can we? Good. It appears it's now unanimous that we merely move this yarn along. If there is a next part, which of course there is, that is if no one is readily prepared to read the usual last parting pair of words handily bandied about in literature, you know, the end, words that are typically and traditionally employed to wrap up most stories you'll read. Well, that will occur here too, but just not quite yet. Time to kick out the jams and get going in full gear. After the discovery of the bump on her bean, Alice was having a trying time recalling the events that had led to her prior morning presence in the Mad Hatter bar and restaurant only a few hours ago. Also, why was the clock moving backward? And Nida, it was so a task getting used to now calling her Dinah. Why had her sister transmogrified into a name-changing cat? In addition, what was this magic mysteriously associated with mirrors? And let's not lose mind of the Jabberwocky, who had fits of reoccurring hallucinogenic Hendrix horrors, those freakish flowers, Dee and Dom, or all the other tidbits of weirdness clouding her mind that she'd encountered within the past several hours. Mentally, it now felt as if she were a percipient prisoner who'd not only been imprisoned prior to a court judgment, but in advance of committing any crime. Was she losing her marbles? Around Alice, everyone now was conversing in riddles and rhymes. It was simply senseless. What would happen next is what she wanted to know. At that very moment, all the music and the chatter of customers, kitchen crew and wait staff alike had come to a close as silence now prevailed within the walls of the Hatter. Turning about on the balls of her feet, she saw the reason why. The Mad Hatter himself and his wife, the Red Queen, the owners of the joint, had just entered the place. Everything there within came to a screeching standstill. Something indeed was undoubtedly up. The Hatter and the Queen rarely came in. That is unless there was a problem. And if there was a problem, you never wanted to be the problem they had a problem with. Silently thinking to herself, Alice thought, now this is certainly going to be a waste of time. Spinning on his heels, the Hatter trapped her with his stare and rudely reprimanded. If you knew time only half as well as we do, then you wouldn't be babbling like a brain-dead brook about it. With a gasp of amazement that the madman had the ability to hear anyone's thoughts, the frightened femme responded, I didn't think... Listen, missy, if you don't think, then you shouldn't be talking. That's the problem of your kind. You're forever going on about things you don't know. Turning to the Queen, he queried, My. What shall we do with such an unruly one? Off with her head, wailed his wife. But I've done nothing, sir. Then, believing it wise, she added, and madam. Well, if you're doing nothing, then why are we paying you? Oh, you really don't pay us that very much, sir, for all the work we do. This girlie sounds basically bonkers, the Queen and Hatter sang out together. Are you bonkers, missy? All right, well, that is an excellent question, and I'm so happy you asked, because I must say, as of late, I'll admit to feeling somewhat off kilter or something. There she goes again. She's not thinking, but thinks she should talk about what she's thinking, even when the girl has no useful thoughts to share, the bullying proprietor proclaimed. Off with her head! Now, spoke the Hatter, I'll ask only one last time. Are you bonkers? Because anyone is bonkers is no reason to treat someone with any less respect. I mean, some of the best brains in history were considered to be bonkers, so... Oh no, this one is more surely and certifiably bonkers, my dear. Off with her head! Getting up and into her grill, the Hatter bellowed, Why are all of you just standing around gathering wool as you rob us blind by stealing money from us while doing nothing? You cheat, you lie, and you drink all the water you want from our faucets without paying us a single cent for it. It's a disgrace. And if you are unabashedly bonkers, we certainly can't keep you here, since the health insurance we so generously provide for every single employee doesn't cover that. Now can we? But, meow, you don't, meow, provide any, meow, insurance for anyone, meow, here, meow, sir, now spoke Dinah. Off with her head! Liar! And who brought this cat into my restaurant? The Board of Health Inspectors would certainly have a field day if they caught us with this mangy flea bag using our divine Dinah as her personal and very fine 5-star litter box. Was it you? He beseeched of Alice. To be honest, sir, she was already here when I arrived. Not only that, she's Nida. You remember Nida, don't you, sir? Who? Nida. Who? Dinah? Who? She's one of the best workers you have here working. Harder than most would for what you pay us, along with tips. Who? Bonkers or not, Alice wordlessly wondered to herself. Eli netko pustio solvu unutra. Or in English, had someone let an owl slip into this place? I heard that, and not only is my name not Owl, but I own this very place. That is, along with my wonderful wife, the Hatter hollowed. Meow, 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 meow. Someone remove this cat from the premises. Out the door and into the street. Now. Off with her head. And with that, the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant bouncers, who also acted as security for the boss and his wife, led Dinah away and out the door. There was nothing left of the cat but its mischievous, toothy, girlish grin, which remained hanging in the air. After that, everyone seemed to dissipate and disappear like a drop of water atop a red-hot grill, except Alice, leaving the woman alone in the room with a throbbing headache, wondering and worrying if she'd ever see her sweet sister again. The cock-eyed clock now read 10:34 p.m, when Alice went back into the packed barroom area of the Hatter. Taking a moment before returning to work, she stood in a corner and faced the wall, then just lost it and began crying after the dreadful offence that had just occurred. Tears now streamed down her pretty cheeks in care and concern for her recently departed friend. She really did need to get it together, and get it together quickly, and return to work. But before she could turn about to leave the corner, she felt the sensation of gentle gyrations, like someone was rubbing their pelvis area against her delicate derriere. Turning around, and right before getting ready to smack some sense into the offending predator, she saw it was Frank, one of the MHBNR regulars. Any woman who worked there knew Frank well. A few had even dubbed him Frottage Frank, because he was what they called a close talker. and was far too touchy-feely. Alice wasn't sure if the story was true, but she'd heard from another worker a twisted tale about him. It happened before her tenure of working at this place. Apparently, some other girl made the mistake of accepting his offer to go out for dinner. Toward the end of the meal, he whipped out his wallet and removed something laminated. Frank told her it's his VIP membership card for an exclusive private club catering to the golden shower crowd called We the People, and they should go for after-dinner drinks. The girl freaked out, excused herself to use the restroom, and then made a hasty retreat out the back to get as far away from him as possible. Nearly as bad, this public pervert was a pitifully poor tipper. "Frank, what are you doing?" "Oh, Alice, I didn't know that was you. Sorry. Can you grab me another Bud Light, sweetheart, and just add it on my tab? I won't get paid until next week." "Oh, wait a minute, it's my birthday today." Tab? Now that's a big fat joke. Frank had no tab, because he was the Red Queen's brother, which by marriage made him the Mad Hatter's brother-in-law, so he never paid for anything. When it came to tipping, no matter how much he'd consumed during his visit, he'd usually leave only a coin or two that he'd had jangling about in his pocket, along with a below-average alibi of taking care of the server the next time he dropped in. It wasn't that Frank was such a bad egg, as far as anyone could tell. He was generally just gross, cheap, smelly, overly obese and annoying. Besides, he had a reputation of drinking so much he'd sometimes fall from his bar stool and couldn't get off the floor. So they'd have to pick him up and put him back together again, so to speak, then set him up on his stool where he could just fall off another time. Frank would also try to scam the staff into thinking it was his birthday at least once a month or more. This was done in order to then make the argument that it was the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant's unwritten policy to serve free drinks to anyone on their birthday, which was not true, but when the Mad Hatter himself found out about the un-birthday drinks, he docked the pay off the unlucky soul who'd served those. One time, after Nida had brought him countless rounds, he left only 13 pennies atop the bar, then departed. Now, Nida had a hot temper, no one could deny that, but it really took a lot for anyone to get under her skin and up her craw enough to completely blow her top. But that night, after seeing the measly amount of the gratuity, she lost it. Grabbing the pennies, she rushed out the door to toss the coins in his face. But alas, Frottage Frank must have already rounded the corner and was nowhere to be seen. For a fat man, he could move swiftly when necessary. It was probably just as well she hadn't pelted him with his pittance, because she really needed this gig, and that fat fracker wasn't worth losing her job over. OK, now that we've lifted the lid on the topic of regulars, perhaps we've opened the door enough to dish some more. Some were normal, some were not, and some were not so normal, but not so much as to be a pain in the poor old derriere. As a matter of fact, she spotted one such individual, drinking at the bar and reading a book, even though, in her opinion, it was too dark to read without hurting your eyes. The guy was somewhat of a mystery to most of the staff, although generally assessed to be of no harm. After getting Frankie's un-birthday beer, she went over to speak to him and said, "Hey, you'll never know what a crazy mixed-up night I've had so far, and there are many miles to still go before I'm out of here. You won't believe some of..." Stopping short as she spoke, she stared at the barroom reader. As with Nida, after morphing into Dinah, he too had ears atop his head. Unlike her sister's perky little ones, his were much longer and rather floppy. Much like her dearly departed friend, he was covered in fur, although whereas her siss's fur was white with random splotches of black here and there, his was simply a solid snow white. Another similarity to Dinah was he too had paws instead of hands. "May she who art in heaven help me," thought Alice. "He looks exactly like a white rabbit." The book reading bunny rested his book on the bar and looked at her with recognition of their past acquaintance. The irises of the white rabbit's eyes were a burning pink colour, much like a summer sunset at a beach. Oddly, she took note that he now had a gold pocket watch attached to a long chain fob, something she'd never seen him sport before. "Are you okay?" he asked Alice with care and concern. "I'm not really sure, and maybe I've just gone insane. But I keep on getting this feeling that something's not right with the world. At least not this world." "This world? Well, that sounds more interesting than the book I'm reading, so why don't you just tell me all about it? I'm all ears." Then, as if to buy more time prior to concluding whether she felt comfortable enough to confide in him, she stalled by asking, "Why are you always reading when you're at our bar?" "Now, Alice, the reasons are threefold. 1, it helps to discourage most people from speaking with me. But you I like and feel comfortable with, and I'm happy when we talk, so present company excluded. 2, with these ears I'm able to hear much all of everything. But with my poor eyesight, every day it's becoming increasingly difficult to see what's around me, which is why I wear these glasses. Since I fear I'll eventually go blind, I take every opportunity to read whenever I can, while still able. 3, books are my mask. They allow me to surreptitiously study everything from around them, take mental notes, then hop home and write about what I've observed. For instance, the idea of looking around is ludicrous, since you may only look backward or forward, or right to left at the same moment. But unless one has a pair of eyes on each side of the head and another pair at the back, well, no one may truly look around all at once. 1, 2, 3, easy peasy, lemon squeezy." Her female intuition told Alice she could probably trust him. So, first checking if any of her managers were watching, she sidled into the bar stool next to the White Rabbit, took a leap of faith, and began to pour out her crazy heart to him. The White Rabbit listened attentively to every detail Alice described to him. Because she was still on the clock, not the one which was mysteriously moving backward, but the one she and the other employees were required to punch ahead of each shift, she spoke rather rapidly and excited. Once successfully relaying an encapsulated version of all the events she'd endured, and when all had been said on what had been done, Alice was breathlessly out of breath. She was also thankfully relieved to have had someone to lend an ear to listen to her confusion. And when it came to ears, the White Rabbit was no slouch. Placing the paw of his right arm on her shoulder, the hare gave it a fatherly squeeze of support. "Well, that's pretty much everything to tell, I imagine. What do you believe I should do?" asked Alice. "I imagine you should first take a breath, then take another, and another, followed by another, and then just keep breathing. Next, I believe when you bounce off this bar stool, you should place one foot in front of the other to take one step after another, and another, followed by another, and then just keep on keeping on until you've thought this fully through." Taking the bunny's first bit of advice, she inhaled, then exhaled, then inhaled again, and so on and so forth, and thankfully it did make her feel somewhat better. During the time Alice had been catching her breath, he had taken out the gold pocket watch and flipped open its lid to see the time. "Holy cabbage and carrots," he gasped. I'm late, for a very important date," then sprung off his bar stool, hopped out of the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant door to go wherever he had to go before it got much later. Have any of you ever thought about this? One can't really catch one's breath, since our breaths are only air. And as with the wind, it's impossible to hold it in your hands or trap it in a snare. And has anyone ever seen time as it goes by and about us? Well, I think not. Now, this is not to say that that which you cannot catch and hold, and that which cannot be snared or seen, is not there. What's being stated has simply been said to set the record straight, so we may continue to sally forth in this story. Okay? Stepping from the bar stool, Alice proceeded to do as the clever cottontail had instructed, placing one foot in front of the other to take one step after another. But before our heroine had gone too far, she bumped right into the Jabberwocky coming out of his office, who said without a please or a thank you, "Alice, go on down to the storage cellar for mushrooms, then take them up to the kitchen." Since arguing with him was like dancing in a minefield, one had to choose carefully. So, from the night manager's door, down the stairs to the cellar, then over to an area where the hatter stored mushrooms, she was struck by a surprising sight. You see, upon the largest mushroom in the lot, which was a very, very, very large mushroom indeed, Alice spied a very, very, very large caterpillar atop the cap of the meaty mushroom. Now that in of and by itself was weird, but what was weirder wasn't that the caterpillar was sitting there with his eyes closed, it was that the caterpillar was smoking a very, very, very large hookah. "Who are you?" Startled, she loudly exclaimed. "Jeff, just Jeff." "Jeff who?" "Just Jeff. I need no other name, for I'm not fish or fowl nor game. Although I'm not like other people, I'm someone just the same. So please, it's just Jeff, for just Jeff's my only name." "You're a caterpillar." "No, I'm just Jeff. But okay, you may have it your way too." "Just Jeff, what are you doing?" "Obviously, I'm taking a hit off of this hookah. Would you like one too?" "I'm happy to share with you." Handing the nozzle tip tube which was attached to the base of the hookah over to Alice, she held it gently but firmly in her soft hands, and was surprised by how warm and rigid the length of it was to touch, then took a second or two to think of what she should do. "Oh, just Jeff, I know not what to do." Take a hit, perhaps a hit or two." "You know, just Jeff, after all that I've been through, why in heaven's name not? Perhaps it could help this headache which seems to have gotten worse. What could possibly go wrong?" Taking his long hard nozzle between her tender, slightly parted, soft red lips, "Again, get your minds out of the gutter." She inhaled deeply. The smoke and vapour from the pipe filled her lungs. Hey, it wasn't so bad. It really wasn't so bad at all. Hold it in, then let it out to do it all again. Blink your eyes, first once, then twice. What comes next is really, really nice. Being a good girl, Alice did as she was told, and in fact it did seem to relieve the pain that was throbbing from her headache somewhat. But then something most strange ensued. You see, she and the caterpillar began to grow to an enormous size, so big that between the two of them there wasn't a single inch of space left unfilled by their size within the huge cavernous cellar. The two were so squashed together that for the second time in a very short while, Alice again found it somewhat difficult to breathe. "Just Jeff, what's just happened?" "We grew and grew and grew, but worry not, the growing stopped, and now dream what you'd like to do." So Alice dreamt that they could be freed from this cramped cellar. When she opened her eyes anew and emerged from her dream, she was upstairs sitting again on the bar stool she'd sat on merely minutes before. More amazing than that, just Jeff was behind the bar serving drinks to anyone who ordered. Only now he looked more like a man than a caterpillar, and was shaking a martini shaker with both hands. "What can I get you?" he asked Alice. "Oh, I'm not really thirsty right now. After the last 12 hours, I believe I need a miracle. You wouldn't happen to have a unicorn behind that bar, would you?" "Sorry, but we're all out of the unicorn today." "Whatever happened to the unicorn?" "Oh, the lion ate the unicorn." "Why did the lion eat the unicorn?" Perhaps it was because the unicorn was not able to run faster than the lion, and fast enough to get away not to be eaten. That also would explain a lot now, wouldn't it? Now, as odd as that sounded to Alice, it made a lot more sense than much of what had happened to her so far. It could also be an explanation as to why we no longer see unicorns anymore. After hearing the disheartening news of what had happened to the last Mad Hatter bar and restaurant unicorn, Alice looked up at the whacked-out clock above the bar to check the time. The hands had now moved back in time to 7:55 p.m, and outside it was daylight. Needing a tick or two after that news to readjust herself to the fact that it wasn't the morning sun rising, it was instead the sun that had unset, and then accepted yet another fact, that there were no longer unicorns, and there would probably never be any unicorns ever again. "You know what I'm thinking now?" she asked Just Jeff behind the bar. "I'm thinking, maybe, I really don't need a unicorn. Anyways, I do have my electric scooter, and that gets me around and between towns exceedingly well." It was then a third fact came to mind. Where was her Segway? Alice had no recollection of having ridden from her home in Brooklyn to where she worked here in Hobohemia, much less than leaving it in the back of the MHR&B to recharge, in the place where she would always keep it plugged in. This was a most worrisome fact, but searching her memory for its whereabouts only encouraged the headache to return, and upon return it felt far worse than before. About to ask Just Jeff for the aspirin they stored behind the bar, and hoping the lion had not eaten those too, a distraction occurred. A knight, attired in a full suit of armour, had entered, stood behind the first customer standing at the bar he encountered, and gave the man a swift kick in the derriere, nearly knocking the poor fellow across and over the top of the bar. The knight then moved to kick the next man, then the next, and then the next. When he was finally behind Giuseppe, who was known as a bit of a tough guy in and around the neighbourhood, and who was there drinking with a few friends, the armoured foot of the knight introduced itself to his vulnerable backside. When Giuseppe fell forward, he not only knocked over his own drink, but some of his friends' drinks too. Reflexively, turning around to face the assaulter who had assaulted him and to assault his assaulter in retribution, the tough guy posed him a question. "Hey, why you a-going to kick me into my bum, brother?" The knight raised the visor of his helmet to reply, "Because I can." "Oh yeah?" "Yes. Turn around and I'll kick it again if you need a further demonstration." Now Giuseppe may have been a tough guy, but he was certainly not foolish enough to turn back around for yet another kick. Instead, he fisted a hand, pulled back his massive arm, and sent one of his infamous haymaker punches in the direction of the offender's face. But before his fist could land on it, the knight flipped down the helmet visor for protection, so Giuseppe's hand smashed into the metal armour protecting the butt kicker. Even from a few yards away, Alice heard some bones break in the tough guy's finger and hand. "Ah!" he screamed in pain, then cradled the mangled metacarpus with a still healthy hand. Giuseppe's friends had to help him out of the bar and get the grimacing guy to a hospital for care. It was then the knight turned to Alice's direction, gestured toward the helmet as he raised his visor once more and spoke. "A helmet is a very good way to protect your crown, Alice, but you can't always be sure it will save you, not even when one is crowned princess or queen." Returning the visor to its closed position, the knight retreated from the darkened hatter to the now radiantly early evening sun shining outdoors, and was gone as quick as he'd come. His parting comment made Alice think that she not only couldn't remember what she'd done with her ES2, she had nary a memory of where the protective headgear helmet was that she wore when riding her scooter. With an elbow on the bar, she now rested her head in her hand. The bump on her forehead was larger, tenderer, and she detected a somewhat sticky substance. Removing the hand from her head, in its palm there now appeared to be a tiny drop of something, red, like blood. Whatever do you believe he meant by that, Just Jeff? Probably just that innovations invented over the years, like helmets, come in rather handy when something is about to hurt your head. I mean the part about that it won't always save you. Maybe that even when you believe you're fully protected, like the way you put your helmet on at the end of a day's shift to ride your scooter home, perhaps you're really not, answered the bartender that once was a caterpillar, and then a man, and who was now spinning and weaving a silk cocoon around himself. Just Jeff, Alice said with an ear-splitting note of alarm in her voice. Whatever are you doing now? The cocoon, already around his body, was now about to encase the face of Just Jeff's head, so he had to tell her sooner than later. I'm changing for the last time, and after that change, I'll eventually die. With a horrified gasp, the girl pleaded, But I don't want you to die. Just Jeff. Please don't go and die. His voice, barely audible beneath the silken cocoon, was now nearly muffled, so what words were spoken by the ever-changing bartender were the last words she or anyone else at the Hatter heard him say. Alice, we don't live forever, not you nor me. And what's more, we don't always get what we want, and sometimes not even what we need. I imagine someone would have told you this by now, so perhaps I should. Alice, when you last rode home you hit a pothole, and now you're... But before he could share the message in full, his head was entirely encased in the silk that cut off his final words. For an amount of time that went unmeasured, she stared through the blur of her tears at Just Jeff's silken coffin. At first she thought it was the distortion of those tears that created another optical illusion to trick her. A beautifully painted wing, and then another, burst out from inside the cocoon, and what next emerged was a lovely butterfly. Jeff, you're not dead yet. I'm so very And as with Just Jeff, Alice was left with unfinished words on her tongue as the butterfly spread its beautiful wings to fly out the restaurant's door and up into the sky. Up, up, up and up towards the sun it flew, never looking back, because at that precise moment one of the seagulls living along the bank of the Hobohemian side of the Hudson River swooped from the sky, snapped up Just Jeff with its beak, and swallowed the caterpillar human butterfly, her new friend, in one bite. Thus the only words the woman had left to utter were, Bye-bye, slatki lecturer, bye-bye. So, if you spoke Croatian, or were not too lazy to translate it with an online Google translator, you'd know she was saying, Bye-bye, sweet butterfly, bye-bye. Perhaps not today, and it may not even be tomorrow, but perhaps sometime in the future, the yet-to-be-invented innovation will be invented that will completely protect caterpillars, humans, butterflies, and even Alice and all her friends. But I'm sorry to be the one to say, sadly, that day just wasn't today. It could have been because her mind was so muddled with all the insane distractions and diversions occurring, or how time was moving backward, along with all the curious characters of recent acquaintance. But Alice was now aware it was later than she thought. The crazy clock above the bar read precisely 5:03 p.m, and it was a very, very, very well-read clock at that. But let's discuss that more at another time, shall we? Perchance it was merely to take her mind off these things, so she dervishly dove into her work in and around the restaurant. One of the Hatter's patrons, in particular, caught her eye. That would be a woman sitting in one of the back booths, adorned from head to toe in white. It wasn't so much the outfit as it was what she wore upon her head, a beautifully bedazzling gem-studded crown. It was also because she was trying to catch Alice's attention and was now staring at the waitress while moving her hands about in the air. The woman in white was scribbling on her palm, employing pantomime to convey the universally accepted and understood gesture used between customers and waitstaff as a wordless way of saying, "Check please." As any competent member of any basic eatery establishment would do, the client's bill was tallied, totalled, carried to the crowned customer, ensconced in a MHR&B faux leather billfold, and left on the table to be paid. "Here you go, ma'am." "Yes, you may now call me madam. No longer the need to continue addressing me as your majesty." "I beg your pardon, madam?" "Oh, are you not, or I guess I should learn to say, were you not one of my subjects?" "One of your subjects, madam? I'm not sure if I understand what you mean. Actually, I feel as if there's not anything I truly understand any longer." "Yes, one of my, or was one of my, loyal subjects." "I'm no one's subject, madam." "Well, that could certainly be a debatable subject. What's your name, dear?" "It's Alice, your majesty, madam." "Well, Alice, being queen is not everything it's made out to be. Don't believe the hype. To begin with, it's very lonely at the top. Nearly impossible to find anyone you may truly trust or confide in." "Oh, I know that feeling, madam. I mean the trusting and confiding part. Then there are all the sycophants who pretend to be your friends but would just as soon stab you in the back for their gain as look at you." "That does sound royally dreadful, madam." "Oh, it is. And don't get me started on this crown." Her Majesty, we mean the lady in white, told her server as she began lifting it from her head, but first had to ask said server for some assistance untangling the hair which had become entangled. Once Alice had succeeded in helping her with the coronet tangled hair, the woman sat the heavenly headwear next to her on the bench of the booth where she was seated to continue their conversation. "Alice? It is Alice, right? Good. And about the crown, I mean the weight of it alone is nearly enough to crush one's soul. Now that's something they never tell you about in Queen's School." "You went to Queen's School, madam?" "Well, truth be told, I was only enrolled for a semester or so at NYU when a knight who rescued me from some pissy little dragon turned out to be a prince. Then I had no other choice but to marry the moron. So what else could one do but drop out of Queen's School, wed the dolt, wait for him to become king so they could coronate me queen, and then wait for him to die, which he just did, finally, today." "Oh my goodness, please accept my condolences for your loss, madam. I'm very, very, very sorry. And by any chance your rescuer wasn't the knight that goes around kicking people up the bum, was he?" "No need for you to be sorry, even if you had been the one who'd killed him, which of course I know you couldn't be." "Oh, by my handmaid's tail, the tail my late husband could never keep his grubby feely mitts off. I tried to warn King William not to ride to the battle in front of his troops and instead to hide behind them, or simply stay home in the cosy castle we shared. Separate bedrooms, mind you." "Oh no. Billy, don't be a hero. Don't be a fool with your life," I told him. But the last thing he'd listen to, both figuratively and literally, was me. No one ever listens to little old moi. "You do speak French, don't you, Alice?" "My native tongue is Croatian. Other than that, I'm sorry to say, English is the only other language I've ever learned." "No need to be sorry again, dearest. Hearing that you don't is actually a relief. For a moment I was afraid you were going to begin babbling back to me in French, and I'd have to pretend to know what you were saying. The only word I know in French is moi, and only picked that itsy-bitsy bon mot up during one of those NYU semesters of Queen's School. I oftentimes wonder, even if I had completed the course, whether the tuition merited what I was taught. Between you and me and the dungeon wall, girlfriend, if I hadn't hitched my star to some dude who'd eventually become king, I'd probably still be paying off student loans to this very day. It's a disgrace the interest rates they charge a kid trying to get a decent education. Why, oh why, didn't I just stick with the original major I'd chosen to earn my degree? Instead, I bent beneath the pressure from my parents to switch during mid-semester and then ended up having to take useless courses like Queening 101. What did you want to do instead of being a queen? I wanted to be a poet, but you know how parents can behave when one of their kids wants to go into the arts. Even though Alice was unable to check the time from where she stood, she had a feeling that a significant amount of it had already lapsed in the course of this mind-boggling conversation. So she did what any trained waitress would do to end an overly long customer contact encounter by saying, "May I get you anything else?" "I'd like to pay you in cash, but I only have very, very, very large bills on my person, darling. But worry not, I will still leave you with a very generous tip for your troubles." "I could always just bring you your change, madam." "No, I don't believe you could really bring change." "Do you know why, my humble servant?" "No." "Then I must tell you. You see, true change may only come from within, which is reason number 1. Reason number 2 is that it's always best when there's been no change between friends and you have become a dear, dear, dear friend, Alice. And last but not least, they never give us queens any petty cash for spending, only credit cards. That must be a blessing for royal accountants, but it's a pain in the derriere for royalty. The patron eyeballed her cheque and then handed over a black American Express Centurion card. A short time later, Alice returned with onion skin thin pieces of paper to be signed by the credit card holder. It showed the food and beverage total, sales tax, a line to enter a gratuity amount, then a line below where the signer should add up and then enter the total of the aforementioned sums. Before she signed the line on the front side that began with the word signature, she read out loud, and to no one in particular, the statement that always appears between the sum total and the signature lines. Card member acknowledges receipts of goods and/or services in the amount shown hereon and agrees to perform the obligations set forth by card member's agreement with the issuer. Right. Well, good luck with that, bucko. After which she rapidly wrote something on the back of the vendor copy before her waitress had retrieved it. The lady must have departed the eatery while Alice was in the kitchen picking up another order to be served to someone else. By the time the Mad Hatter employee returned to collect the payment, the woman was already gone. Picking up the billfold bearing the payment, she was about to walk away with it when something that was sitting upon the overstuffed faux leather bench glittered and caught her eye. It was a woman in white's lovely bejewelled crown. Alice snatched it up, then ran to the street-side exit of the restaurant. Peering from the doorway, first to the right, then left, up and down the street outside, the lady was nowhere to be seen. Returning with the faux leather billfold in one hand and the gloriously gorgeous crown in the other, the server moved to an area where they kept the credit-debit card processing terminals. She thought to herself, perhaps there's some information on this receipt that would help me return this to its rightful owner, as she set the crown upon the bar while inspecting the bill of fare. Immediately, 2 things caught her eye. 1, the name the woman had signed, the White Queen. 2, in the location where patrons could include the gratuity, all she saw, in all uppercase block letters, was "Always see the other side." So Alice looked at the other side. In artfully scripted handwriting that possessed such painstaking and breathtaking penmanship that anyone would be wooed by its wonder, there were cryptic couplets written in tiny letters. "Alice, my tips for you are twofold. Now here's number 1. We have no guarantee in life of one more rising sun. I've travelled all around this world, seeing all that could be seen. Now I see so clearly. I am now sick of being queen. So take my crown and wear it, even if only for this day. But please be sure to share it before you go away. When you meet the pauper, give freely from your heart, for all must come to end, for your final life to start. Within your time, do what you can to soothe the pain of strife. With kindness, care for others, do good always with your life. When we go and how we go answers not the question why. All we take in our departing is just this life when we die. Tip 2 applies solely to you before you come undone. Depend not on tomorrows, some tomorrows never come. Like every hour, like your last, because you never knew. Life went faster than you planned when the mirror you went through. Below this poem was this note: with kind regards and please do good always. Pam the poet, formerly known as the White Queen. P.S. Please keep the crown, if only for less than a day. I'm so sick of what it always does to my hair. What was the cryptic ciphering about on the back of the White Queen's bill? Alice so wished Nida, Dinah, the White Rabbit, Just Jeff, or just about anyone with a friendly face was still around, and from whom she could ask for conference and consultation. Since they were not, she set the crown atop her head while she read the poem for a second time. But even after the second reading, followed by a third and finally a fourth, its meaning still eluded her. Alice was still wearing the crown when she became aware of a scuffle at the door. One of the bouncers was in some sort of altercation there. As she neared to see and hear what was going on, the following event played out. "Mister, I have the money to buy your food. Please let me in like any other person," said a dishevelled and somewhat unkempt-looking woman wearing a heavy winter overcoat, though the day was hot and even a bit sticky from the dense humidity that permeated the now stuffy air. From her shoulder hung a bag with what appeared to be an assortment of equally dirty and soiled stuffed animals. "I have some money, mister, see? Please, have a heart, sir." Holding out a handful of change in her palm so the bouncer would see she wasn't lying, the woman hoped against all hope that he'd find it in his heart to let her in. Alice was now next to the two of them. Next, the bouncer muttered a curse beneath his breath and heartlessly smacked all the coins from the outstretched hand. The money went spilling inside the door and all across the MHB&R floor. Grabbing her roughly by the shoulders, he pushed her out the door and in the direction of the street. "Jude!" she screeched at the top of her lungs. "Stop it! Just stop it! I know her. She's a friend of mine." Alice lied. "Get away from her. I'll take care of this." Whether it was the tone and strength of her voice or the enraged and berserk burning look of her eyes, the bouncer wordlessly retreated and left them alone. The woman, who appeared to be homeless and more than a little down on her luck, had already begun to walk away. "Ma'am, please wait. I want to help you." Slowly, with caution and trepidation, the woman turned to ask, "You want to help me, dear?" And then moved back, but not into the door which she dared not walk through again. "I have to help. Maybe it's the last thing I'll ever truly and fully understand. You see, I do now know if you possess the ability to help someone in need, then just pretend they're not there and do nothing. You've committed a sin far worse than all the sins detailed in the Bible's 10 Commandments. I know it's not explained exactly that way anywhere in the good book, and I haven't read all of it, but enough of it to know it's a message they're trying to tell us on every page. Be kind to one another. Do good. Always. 8 words. 8 little words. And if we only all live by those words, then what a wonderful world this could be." "Wait a minute, ma'am. Please, just wait a minute. I have to help." Going down on her hands and knees before the stranger, and with head hung so humbly low that one would have thought the crown Alice wore could have slipped and fallen off, she crawled about collecting the coins. When the last was gathered, she stood before the waiting woman, counting them to be sure all had been recovered. In total they numbered 13. Funny, when Alice had first begun gathering, she was sure they were nickels, dimes or quarters. Now tallying them up, there seemed to be, oh my, they appeared to be 13 pieces of silver. I found 13, ma'am. If there are more to find, please tell me and I'll search again. Even though the destitute woman's lips looked cracked and sore, and there were many teeth missing, when she smiled in confirmation of the number, it was the most beatific smile Alice had ever had the privilege to accept. Yes, Alice, 13, right on the nose. Those pieces of silver, as well as another incident from eons past that weighs upon my heart and soul, were mine to bear for as long as I can remember, and I'll probably continue carrying them through eternity. I once did something that I'm not proud of to someone who loved me with all their heart and soul. In a way, they're like my cross to bear. I'll be on my way now, dear. Wait, please wait, she beseeched the woman who had yet not turned away. Lifting the crown away and up from her noodle, Alice placed it upon the other woman's head and said, I must give you this. I want you to have it, ma'am. What, you want me to have what may be one of your most prized possessions? You're willing to share and give your crown to a pauper, Alice? Placing a hand over her heart prior to saying another word, she knew that although well-intentioned, the words which the pauper had just spoken could no longer be held as true, or at least they were no longer Alice's truth. No, it's not what I value most any more, ma'am. Then you do indeed have a very kind and noble spirit, girl, and I bless you, she said while walking away from the hatter, crowned in all her glory. As Alice watched her depart, her hand was still above her heart, and with a start she realised it was no longer beating. What was that? The entire building in which the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant was a part of now shook with a tremor and a rumble for several seconds before stopping. Was it an earthquake? Alice wasn't sure if Hobohemia had ever been hit by one before. She knew for certain during the time she'd made the trip on her electric scooter between Brooklyn and the restaurant, she could not recall ever hearing of this sort of occurrence in the past. To be absolutely honest, since her head had been hurting for whatever reason, it was increasingly difficult to sift through thoughts as well as clearly recall past memories. Like what had happened prior to the last nearly 24 hours, or where she'd parked the Segway and left her protective headgear helmet. How had she come by that nasty bump on her forehead that ceaselessly throbbed and perhaps bled a bit? Once more the entire building vibrated as it was struck by these odd, sudden shock waves from somewhere unknown. What was odder, no one else within the walls of the MHR&B took notice of the occurrence. Only Alice. Even more peculiar was nothing had fallen from any shelves. The beer mugs hanging from hooks that held them suspended above the bartender's side of the bar neither swayed nor moved. The seismic phenomena that Alice had first noted occurring at 1:07 p.m, at least according to the time-warped Hatter timepiece, showed no sign of relenting. Again and again it felt as if the building was rocking and shaking and rattling and rolling uncontrollably. Meanwhile, for most, life within those walls went on in a much blinded bliss of ignorance. No one around her seemed to be aware, much less than show any sign of concern or panic. Sto ne uredu sovim ludima. Svi ili spaveju ili im mozak naradi, Alice thought to herself. Oh, and which was Croatian, of course, for what's wrong with these people? They all must be asleep or brain dead. Each wave of the increasingly violent tremors shook her to the bone and rattled her brain. It was even becoming difficult to maintain balance as they continued ceaselessly. As a precaution, she reached back and latched onto the edge of the bar behind her, worrying her legs would go weak and buckle. Doesn't anyone else feel that? Alice now screamed at them. What's wrong with you people? Why are you all just sitting there doing nothing like a bunch of zombies? Nary a one had raised their head to acknowledge her cry. Nay, none had halted conversations nor pulled cell phones out to call for help or to say a final farewell to loved ones they'd never see again. All were oblivious to what was happening. What was wrong with them? What was wrong with all of them? What in all of God's great glory, as she watched over them, was the hell wrong with everyone? Then, like a sun rising on a brand new day, it dawned on Alice. No one had heard her. She screamed louder and louder and louder, but to no avail. They all just went on drinking and talking, going about their business, as if she wasn't even in the same world or dimension, much less than the same bar as them. She must somehow, some way, and not later but now, get them to hear her. It was a monumental matter of life and death after all. Spotting Frottage Frank in a corner, leaning in far too much while he spoke to one of the other waitresses, she made her way while teetering on unsteady legs toward him and hollered, "Frank! Frank, don't you feel it? That shaking, those tremors, the quaking and all the shuddering, don't you feel anything at all?" But Frank, now with his hand on the cornered waitress's curvaceous hip, displayed not a sign he'd felt anything unusual or had heard her shouting at him. He just went on talking while the trapped woman with him attempted to squirm away and out of the touchy-feely creep's reach. Alice, from the corner of her eye, saw the Jabberwocky had emerged from the laird he employed as his office and was walking the length of the bar-room, calmly and without a care. Running to him, she implored, "We have to get these people out of here before the whole building collapses, and we have to do it right this moment. It's getting worse. It's getting worse. It's getting so much worse now." Although for a moment a concerned look had spread across the Jabberwocky's beard-stubble face, he immediately stuck a stubby finger in the air in a gesture of fiat lux, as if he'd remembered something, and then walked back in the direction of the office he'd departed, as though not seeing her. Thinking that this was a joke that everyone was in on but her, from all the employees to a few of the regulars, she now sought the assistance of strangers. Table by table, person by person, the weary and worried woman, without success, did all within her weakening powers to make them hear, see, acknowledge and confirm her existence in some fashion. But not a single soul appeared to have heard, seen, acknowledged, or could confirm that Alice was even alive. The trembling and the shaking were so severe she now decided if they didn't want to be saved from certain death, then she had no other choice than to save herself. In a state of complete, abject, hopeless horror, Alice did her best to cross the length of the uneven bar-room floor to make it out and through the door. Her feet felt leaden and becoming even heavier with every step she took in that direction. "You're all going to die if you don't get out right now," she shrieked as she ran. "Get out! Get out! Get out! Before the building collapses on you and you're buried in a grave of rubble! Get your sorry asses out before it's too late!" Since no one would listen to her, what other choice had she but to leave them all behind? As if in a dream, Alice moved in slow motion that decreased in velocity the nearer she came to her desired destination of making it through the door. Had gravity been turned up one increment above 10, its uppermost level, and was now set at 11, looking above to the ceiling, and for some inexplicable reason, it appeared to be the undercarriage of a motor vehicle. Hopefully the nauseating dizziness she felt at the pit of her stomach couldn't get much worse than it was. But it did, and simply would not diminish. The whole room spun about like one of those stupid carnival rides, the kind that by the time it stopped you were ready to puke your guts out, along with all the cotton candy, popcorn, sickly sweet drinks, corn dogs, and any other crappy carnival cuisine consumed while visiting an amusement park. And there was nothing to think of that was amusing about what was now happening to Alice. Her skin had grown cold and clammy, as red-hot bolts of fire shot through her tired body in flashes. Her legs turned into rubber, the spine she needed for support melting like a popsicle left out in the sun, and legs buckling beneath her. With a sigh of recognition and resignation of what was happening, The floor suddenly rushed upwards to meet her downward falling face. She had landed upon it head first, collapsing, unconscious, and still inside the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant, a mere 8 feet away from the door through which Alice had sought salvation. It was so dark. It was cold and scary too. No light, no feeling, no sound, and no idea where she was or what had happened. No, wait a minute. There was a sound. A very, very, very faint sound. Alice? Alice? Can you hear me now, Alice? It was a voice in the darkness, a very, very, very kind, gentle and understanding voice. Without a doubt it was a woman's voice, a voice Alice was sure she'd heard before. Once in Croatia, one night as she knelt before her small child-sized bed saying her prayers when she was only 4 or 5 years old. The second time was the woman who had spoken to her at the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant, the one who had written her a poem and left the crown. Alice, don't be frightened. What happened to you has or will happen to everyone eventually. Alice, can you hear me? Her eyes, now fluttering like an egret on a lagoon attempting to fly up and away, did their best to open all the way. Concentrating intensely as she fought to regain consciousness so she could identify the speaker. That's all right, Alice. Take a second to come out of it fully. That trip from here to there always takes a lot out of the soul. Just ask my son sometime, and that boy will give you quite an earful of what happened to him when he made the trip. I told him not to go, but you know the way kids are and how they never listen to a parent. I tried to tell him they wouldn't understand why he was there and he'd only freak them out. That it was way, way, way too soon yet, and they still needed more time to evolve to a point where they could love one another more than they loved themselves. But that boy, I mean, he has a good heart, and he was hell-bent on saving them. There are times I suspect my son has a messiah complex or something. I mean, the way he cares about helping those in need and all. Well, I guess that's his cross to bear. But no one ever listens to little old moi. If you're feeling up to it now, Alice, and would like to talk, I'm sure you have questions I'd be happy to help you with, as well as a few things to tell you. With the assistance of the woman speaking, she struggled to sit up, studying the surroundings. Nothing looked familiar. Where am I? You're here now, but you may also be wherever you want to, whenever you like. You are now part of the one, so you are everywhere. Am I dead? We don't use that word, for, as you'll learn from being here with us, death does not exist in the sense people are accustomed to using it. Alice, nothing that has lived has ever truly died. The truth is, everything simply changes, then continues to go on infinitely. I don't understand. I do. There's much to know and understand, but you have all the time now that there ever was. So just lay back again, close your eyes, and dream of where you really want to be. May I first ask you something else? Of course, my dear friend. It's so rare anyone really listens to what little old moi has to say, so it'd be a pleasure, God told her. My baby. Is my baby okay? Did my baby make it? Giving Alice's hand a supportive and motherly squeeze, she whispered, Close your eyes, Alice, and go to sleep now. Dream of where you want to be and who you want to be with you. And if that's your daughter, then she will be there, I promise you. Laying her head back down on the pillow that was as soft as a cloud, Alice closed her eyes, wondering what her daughter would look like, then slipped into a deep, deep, deep dream. In this dream, she was home, back in her homeland of Croatia, in the city of Zagreb, far from the country's broken coastline along the Adriatic Sea. And somewhere, far, 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 but not so far away it was out of earshot, she heard a tiny baby cry. When the late-night accident had occurred, there was no one else on the street. After the electric scooter had struck the side of the small truck festooned with unframed sheets of glass and mirrors along its side, and she went headlong and helmet first over the handlebars and through a looking-glass, another interesting phenomenon of physics had occurred. Going over those handlebars, both feet had reflexively locked around the steering column in a failed attempt of saving herself. That in and of itself was not the interesting phenomenon of physics which an earlier reference was already made. Due to the vehicle's velocity and the angle of impact, the 26+ pounds foldable Segway ES2 scooter had slid sideways and beneath the parked van. With Alice's feet being locked in the way they were, it dragged her body as it slid beneath the carrier and out of view along with itself. For many hours she lay unconscious, hurt and bleeding beneath the undercarriage. As night became early morning, a pedestrian or two, several cars and a lone jogger had passed by without seeing her. It wasn't until an observant member of the Hobohemian Police Department first noticed the broken glass and mirror, then later what was determined to be chunks of chrome, some other metal bits strewn on the street and beneath the rig, as well as a cell phone, 2 CDs still shrink-wrapped in jewel cases, and what appeared to be an enveloped card. Upon closer inspection, the officer noticed a single skid mark by the van. Looking underneath, he saw what any person on the force of Hobohemia's finest dreaded most to see. "This is Unit 8, this is Unit 8. I have what appears to be a female beneath a van, severely injured and bleeding. Send an ambulance and request backup. Send ambulance and backup ASAP. This is an emergency. Repeating, this is an emergency. Over and out." By the time most folks were on their way to work that day, the ambulance had already arrived. With the help of 2 cops, the 2 EMS workers were able to remove Alice's body from underneath the truck where it had been trapped. After a quick examination, the more medically proficient of the emergency team had determined the girl was still alive, but just barely. He reported to the commanding officer at the scene that evidence indicated she'd been there for several hours, unconscious and losing blood, and her prognosis was far from good. Again, with the EMS and the HPD working shoulder to shoulder, they managed to slip a support slat, in case of any spinal injuries, under Alice's limp, bruised and bleeding body. They then got her up on a collapsible gurney, and with sirens blaring, whisked the woman off to the closest hospital emergency room. After a few blocks, the attendant who was riding in the back shouted to the driver, "You can slow down and turn the siren off. I'm calling this. She's gone. The time of death is 9:01 a.m. Let's take her body in and then grab some coffee." And with that, our tale comes to a close. Or does it? This was it, and Buckley felt just like turning around and going home without playing the song he wanted her to hear. The one he'd written for her on the subject of a potential them. His mouth couldn't have got any drier than if it was stuffed full of super absorbent, super jumbo Berkeley Jensen organic cotton balls. Right now he felt like an out-of-place idiot, standing in the middle of a busy bar restaurant with his guitar strapped uncomfortably to his right shoulder. Instead, he decided to stay and just give it his best shot. An entertainer the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant had hired to perform for the night just announced he'd be taking a short break. So the house DJ filled the momentary silence with songs that only a younger crowd probably knew a line or two of the lyrics well enough to sing along with, here and there. Halfway between the makeshift stage and the men's restroom, Buckley was able to intercept the exiting performer and offer his deal. Hey. First off, solid set, man, well played. Now, second, let's make a deal." "What kind of fucking deal are we fucking talking about here?" You clear it with the manager here, and if you guys let me play just one song, I'll give you $100 in cash. Buckley knew talk was cheap, so he held out the C-note as a testimonial to his sincerity and integrity. This offering, an act accepted without delay by the other party in the transaction, was a small price to pay if he could only get her to hear what he poured his heart into and composed. He'd come prepared, so if the performer had wanted more than the original offer tendered, Buckley had some wiggle room stashed in the wallet nestled in the back pocket of his blue jeans. But now the deal was done, and at a bargain basement price to boot. Remember, you have to clear it with the manager here. I don't want to get shut down less than a minute into it after giving you $100. Deal? Deal, but I don't need to clear it with no fucking manager. That's my fucking equipment. This is my fucking show. If the fucking manager here has any fucking problem with it, he can fucking take it up with fucking me. I'll punch his fucking lights out like I fucking did last week. Now I've got to drop a few kids off for a fucking swimming lesson, so you just go and play for as fucking long as you fucking like. Catching the house DJ's eye, then making a slashing motion at his throat to give him the fucking cut it sign, the bowel movement challenged performer, then disappeared into the men's room to keep the aforementioned swim class appointment. Following the orders of the only one who appeared to be in fucking charge here, the house music abruptly cut out and a terrifying shock of silence fell upon the establishment. Buckley marched with resolution in the direction of the makeshift stage. Upon it were two microphones on stands, a speaker case with an amp head resting on top where the mic cables were attached, and a single solitary bar stool. Buckley froze. Did he really want to do this? Take the risk of looking like a fool in front of not only strangers, but the one for whom he'd written the song, and at the restaurant where she worked waiting tables. Partially by the forfeiting of a Benjamin, but mainly by how much he needed her to hear his song, he mustered the courage to set foot upon the small stage. While he hadn't spotted Alice on his way into the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant, or even en route to the stage, he knew she must be around somewhere. Not only could Buckley sense her presence somewhere within the restaurant, but he'd also stopped by the place last night before her shift had ended and they'd spoken briefly. In all honesty, he hadn't innocently just dropped in for a drink last night. Nida, not only another Mad Hatter server, but Alice's friend, had tipped him off during a prior visit that the object of his affection would be celebrating her 26th birthday yesterday, so Buckley had come bearing a gift. A while ago, Alice, who was born in Croatia, had shared with him who her favourite recording artists were. One was a female rapper from Slovenia called Nida, aka the Balkan Trap Diva. The other, a Bosnian singer-writer, was Dino Merlin, aka the Wizard. So, doing his due diligence, Buckley logged into his Amazon Prime account to find and purchase a CD by each of them. From a bit of research on Wikipedia, he discovered that the Slovenian's most notable hit record was Slajana, and that Merlin's was Ruja. Buckley made sure he'd bought an album from each on which they were included. In addition, he'd also picked up a simple birthday card for her and written a message that said, "Alice, happy B-Day. Hope you still have a CD player at your place, and if not, I'll be happy to rip the tracks and send them to you. Best B-Day wishes, Buckley." He'd toyed with the thought of signing it Love Buckley, but was worried it might be slightly overplaying his hand. After all, the lovelorn lad was still not quite sure where he stood with the desired red-haired woman of his dreams. When he'd been there last night to drop off his gift, he stayed long enough for a beer before giving her the CDs and card. When paying for the drink, Buckley casually asked, "You working here tomorrow?" "Yeah, gotta pay the rent, right?" "Right." "Buckley, I'm pregnant." To say this took him by surprise was an understatement. Regaining composure, he replied, "Then we should talk." "Not now, it's my birthday, and I just found out the staff is throwing a little party to celebrate after we close. Besides, I'm slammed with tables tonight. And yes, we should talk. Can you come by tomorrow, Buckley? Okay. Standing to leave, and while fishing the gift from his shoulder bag, the bashful boy hurriedly told her, "Happy birthday, I gotta go, but I promise I'll be back tomorrow," before rushing out of the Hatter. Feeling like he'd made a fool of himself again, Buckley went home, having not spoken the words he wished he'd had the courage to share with her. Once inside the tiny hobohemian one-bedroom apartment, he picked up his steel-string guitar to write her a song. The words that poured from his heart as he sang were the exact words he'd wanted to tell her from almost the first day they'd met. In about an hour, the song was written. After composing it, he knew what his next steps had to be. Return to the Mad Hatter Bar and Restaurant tomorrow night, let Alice hear his song, discuss what they needed to talk about. Buckley set about unpacking and tuning his guitar, and then checking to be sure that both microphones were live. He climbed atop the bar stool on stage and launched into the tune aptly titled Alice. Wherever she was tonight, he was sure, after hearing her own name repeated while he performed, she would emerge to listen more closely.
In the negative charge, meet the positive charge. When they come together, the air's electrified. Alice, come on now tonight. Oh, Alice, come out to play. Let down your long red hair. Someday, somewhere, somebody will care. Love your beauty and all of your flaws. Pick you up every time you fall. Oh, Alice, come on now tonight. Oh, Alice, come out and play. Someone who'll never get tired of you. Someone so inspired by you. Who loves everything that you do. Got them forever desiring you. Alice, come on now tonight. Oh, Alice, come out and play. Aphrodite, she envy you, jealous of all that you do. You dance like the sea in the naked moonlight. Alice, you just got to come out tonight. Come on now, Alice. Come out tonight. Oh, Alice. Come out to play. Alice, hold on to your life. You got to put up a fight. Live for today, play in the sun. Some tomorrow, it just never comes. Alice, come out tonight. Oh, Alice, come out tonight.
But the woman never appeared. Instead, and in the middle of repeating the ending chorus, he was cut off by a woman's scream. Stopping the performance and turning around, he discovered it was Nida. With a cell phone still held to the side of her face, she began crying as she repeated a single word over and over and over again. No, 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 no. The other waitresses from the MHB&R, all except Alice that is, rushed to her side. Seeing that Nida had begun to swoon, one of the girls grabbed the phone, while another two helped to gently ease her in a prone position on the barroom floor, where she was now sobbing uncontrollably. The one with Nida's phone spoke into it, listened, and then she too began to cry. The waitress with the phone said something to the others that Buckley could not hear. Like chain lightning, and in rapid succession, each turned on the waterworks. "I can't believe it, she's..." one wailed. Another one, "Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my..." In confusion, along with an unexplainable sense of dread, Buckley hopped off the bar stool with the guitar still in hand and moved toward them to investigate.
Come, come, come out tonight. Come, come, come out to play. Come, come, come out tonight. Alice, come out and play.